Hello, and welcome to AWS Made Easy episode number 40. Wow, I can't believe 40 episodes. That's really neat.
Yeah,
How are
we
you,
should
Rahul?
have had the tag or the episode title on top. But yeah, 40 episodes. Wow, it's been quite an accomplishment. There we go.
Yeah, it really has.
So,
It's
how's
been
your
really
week
fun
been
to.
or weekend been?
Oh, really fun. Well, actually, we talked about something last week that I'll put on the screen. Let's see. I'll share this window. So last week we hinted at a preview of an event, and this is what the event was. Uh, so this was John Meyer, myself, Darko Mazaros, Corey Quinn, Anastasia Vineski, and my dad Jeff. We all got together for an evening of pizza and podcasting. We did a recording where we just sat down and talked about our different experiences, and it was really fun. So the content for that should be coming out. It's in the cutting room floor, as they say. So
Oh,
that
that is
that
awesome.
was a lot of fun. That was a really
I
fun
can
gathering.
imagine. And pizza at Jess Place is a whole other experience as well. So,
He's been iterating on this
so
pizza for decades now. So this is that was really nice. And so yeah,
awesome. Yeah,
it
I'm
was a
gonna.
really fun time. Um, let's see. You also might notice I'm in a different location. I'm actually on site at Amazon at the moment. So I'm in one of these little recording booths. But then there's the down the hallway there. We've got a partner meeting over the next couple of days. So that'll be fun. Just working more closely together, more integrated with them, with other Amazon partners. So I'm really excited for that, and I'll be reporting on that as the summit progresses.
Awesome. No, we're looking
How was
forward
your
to
weekend?
that. And sorry, yeah, my weekend was very interesting. We decided to take a quick road trip from Chennai to Bangalore, and so this week I'm in Bangalore and recording out of here. It's interesting that this week is spring break in school, in at least my kids' school, and feels really weird that they would call it spring break because in Chennai there's no concept of spring. The weather just goes from warm to really hot, and so the notion of spring doesn't really apply. But anyway, they have the week off, so we decided to drive down to Bangalore and spend the week over here. So yeah,
Oh,
met
fun.
up with a lot of family, friends, and uh, old and new colleagues, and yeah, it was good fun.
Well, awesome. That sounds great. Well, it's been a bit of a crazy week. Speaking of weekends, it's been a crazy weekend in tech. Looking at SVB's changes, that's been really odd. What is your perspective on that? How have you seen? What are people talking about?
Yeah, I mean, initially I thought that this was probably just impacting a lot of the US startups, but turns out there are a large number of the big startups over here in India too are being affected because, or were initially affected, given that they had all of the deposits in SVB. So I think for pretty much the entire startup community, where you have all these big PEs investing or the VCs investing in them, it's impacted pretty much everyone. So I'm glad that there's some sort of a resolution, at least for the customers of SVB. So that's been a little bit of a relief, but quite the drama over the weekend.
Yeah, ab- absolutely. We have a friend with a startup, and a large amount of their deposits were in SVB, and I think they had a really nervous weekend. Seems like luckily it seems like that everyone will get paid, and that seems like it'll be business as usual from the client perspective. But if you're a shareholder or an investor in them, uh, still got a
Good
rocky road
luck.
ahead of you. Yeah, because it might not recover your assets, but that's the nature of investing, right? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
True.
So hopefully,
Correct.
hopefully, at least the depositors will looks like they'll be safe.
Okay. So with that, to more money in the bank, we have a few interesting announcements to discuss today, don't we?
Absolutely. Let's start with AWS config, and I'll queue up the transition now. All right, AWS Config now supports 18 more resource types. This is exciting. We've covered config a few times. This isn't the first time they've had this type of announcement, but it's exciting every time this
Right.
comes out just to be able to bring your configuration into one place, or be your configuration
Correct.
monitoring into one place.
Correct.
So
And
let's
now
have a
that they
look.
have 18 new resources, that's actually really exciting. Um, the thing I like about config the most is the fact that you can standardize a lot of your rules and figure out what resources across your entire organization are non-compliant. And that is, I think a lot of folks kind of underestimate how important that is. If you are trying to save money across a vast number of resources spread across different stakeholders in an organization, having AWS config is probably one of the most important services in your tools or arsenal that you can deploy to make sure that you really understand what's going on across the board. And if you didn't have this, I really don't know how you would look for compliant or non-compliant resources. So AWS config on system manager as a mechanism to control and manage all of your resources is incredibly vital to gain some sense of control and executing to a plan of cost savings.
Absolutely, I really like that idea of being able to view everything in one place and being able to, because so much of accounting and quantification really comes down to how you view your certain things. You can view it from a lot of different ways. You can view it by organization or by purpose. Uh, and so it's really nice to be able to have some standardization on top of that.
Correct. So now that these new services are available, like I'm glad that they brought in the Lex service, the bot and the bot aliases in there, because a lot of these bots are customer facing, and you want them as regulated as like you want, the branding on the bots to be regulated. You want them to follow certain standard brand paradigms. You don't want bots to be launched willy-nilly without different parts of the organization having signed off on what it should do, how it should operate, where it should operate. So yeah, it's great that a lot of these peripheral services are also now available within AWS config. So if you haven't
Yeah,
checked out AWS config yet, to do that. Sorry, go
that
ahead,
makes a lot of
Stephen.
sense. I could see that. So in your Lex bots, you want to make sure that, well, like you said, all your branding is consistent across all the different bots, because that's part of the reassurance to the customer that you do have a coordinated and organized and centralized process.
Correct. And similarly, device farms. I mean, for example, you want to make sure that the very specific set of devices are being tested, are being run. And one of the places where I can see us implementing this very shortly is sometimes there are certain devices that you don't want to keep testing on over and over again because they're defunct. They're not part of your um, support matrix, and so you want to drop them and you want to save money on running all your tests on those kind of devices. So if you have that configured in AWS config, then you could probably actually run those checks and make sure that you get compliant against a fixed set of devices that are in your support matrix.
Well, neat. All right, this sounds really good. I'm really glad. Yeah, so go check out AWS config. Here's the list of supported resource types. So this is the whole list of all the different things you could put in AWS config to so you can have your centralized monitoring. I think I know what we're going to rate this, but I think this is a simplifies.
Without a doubt, this is a simplifies because it centralizes and standardizes a lot of these management and audit exercises. And the blog post is actually pretty straightforward and links directly to the list of all the supported metrics. So yeah, this is a good four
Excellent.
clouds.
Nice work for the AWS config team. I'll put up the four cloud rating. There we go. Again, check out
Awesome.
config. The link is in the comments. All right. Well, let's move on to our next one, which is going to be an announcement about Redshift. All right, in this announcement, Redshift announces lower data warehouse base capacity configuration for Amazon Redshift serverless. So this is reminiscent of the Neptune announcement that we did last week, right? Lowering that
Correct.
base capacity of what serverless truly means. So there's again,
Correct.
people confuse sometimes serverless and scale to zero, and whether or not they are the same thing, we want it to be the same thing. So
Yeah. In an
with a
ideal
lower
scenario, it
base,
should all be scaled to zero. It
yeah.
isn't there yet.
But
Yeah.
with
So in
this,
this one, we basically had a base requirement of having 32 RPUs or the Redshift processing units, and now that limit has been lowered to 8, which is pretty neat. So if you have, periods where you're not really using a lot of that processing, there are a lot of scenarios where processing typically happens at the end of each day or at the beginning of a day before, the usual daily transactions happen. Um, this is a classic case where you should use serverless, where you have loads that are not quite stable throughout the day and they are variant. Serverless makes a lot of sense there, and you can scale down to literally 8 RPUs. I hope that eventually they'll come down to about one or half an RPU for these kind of loads, but it's a step in the right direction. And you effectively reduce uh, the current base costs or fixed costs by at least 75%.
now I wonder what enables them to make this type of innovation. Is it better bin packing on the Redshift servers? Well, as a
No, I think it's just what you need to keep warm. The more dynamic allocation of compute you can create, it's the units of compute that you can kind of dynamically allocate to the service. And I think a large part of that is driven by um, Nitro and or the version of Nitro for a particular service. Now, different services access data in different ways, have minimum or have certain constraints on the amount of compute that you kind of will have to um, have at a minimum to be able to access those kind of resources that are associated with it. For example, with Redshift, the specific instance types that run under the hood in Redshift are pretty beefy ones, right? They're the Ds, which have a minimum of, I think, 8 vCPUs, if I'm not mistaken. So you need to be able to have enough compute power that when requests start coming in, it can get started and at least start processing queries and not be limited by the amount of CPU or memory associated with it. So I think that's really the constraint. With Redshift, you need to have, if it's a serverless offering, you need to be able to keep a whole bunch of stuff in memory so that you can scan, analyze, and return results very quickly.
And so Nitro is what enables a large instance to then be divided up into smaller units, such as an 8 RPU unit, because there's obviously the servers, like you said, they're very beefy. They're these huge servers, but being able to partition 8 RPUs off of that and then dedicate that to a serverless job, that is, yeah, that allows usage of Redshift where previously you wouldn't want to have had 32 standing RPUs at all time, but having 8 is a lot more palatable.
Correct. And more importantly, if a query came in, to, to have enough resources available at a minimum to be able to return those, sub millisecond or just in a couple of milliseconds to be able to return the results of those queries back. That is, I think, what is the constraint on the minimum RPUs. Otherwise, you would have long cold starts, and that kind of defeats the purpose of having this kind of a serverless setup.
No, that makes sense. I was just looking at
Like if
the
you had to load
Redshift
up a
pricing here.
petabyte of data into memory, if you scale down to 0, right, the first time you receive a request, you're going to have to provision the CPU. You're going to have to load at least many gigs, if not terabytes or petabytes, into memory as part of the scans of all these rows, and that's going to take time. So you're kind of limited um, by the minimum amount of resources that you need to keep stuff in memory, so you're not doing these scans from
Yeah,
scratch
and that's one thing
every
that
single time a query comes in.
has to be warm, right? We don't have this
Yes.
we call it NVRAM necessarily, where it's just where it could be cold. All right,
Yeah.
that's pretty
And
neat. And looking at the base
correct.
RPUs, you could have up to 512 RPUs on the high end. But now they've already updated
Yes.
that Redshift pricing, so you can do base from 8 RPUs in units of 8, all the way up to 512 RPUs.
Correct. So yeah,
Well, let's see.
so I think this is, I don't know if it simplifies, but definitely is a big cost savings exercise. It just pushes people to use more serverless, which is really where all the value is in these services. You want to be on serverless, and it was probably preventing a lot of people from getting into Amazon Redshift serverless, and instead they hosted their own or ran their own instance on whatever base um, EC2s that they picked. But yeah, this will push them in the right direction. This is what you really want
Absolutely.
to do. You want
And
serverless.
on our, we often talk about our trajectory of cost savings, where the first step is going to be, um, well, we often talked about in the trajectory. One of the steps is use managed services, right? There's
Correct.
the low hanging things. Do that first. S3 intelligent tiering, and then step two, switch over to managed services, switch over to serverless, and then step three is the big rewrite. And so this is a good, I suppose, step two process, right? Being able to switch over to
Correct.
Redshift serverless, being able to scale down to 8 RPUs. All right. Well, we've rated this as a neutral
Great.
because it's not neither simplifies nor adds complexity. What do you think on the cloud scale?
I think this is a 4. I think this is pretty straightforward, simple, easy to digest. And
And you get links to 3 different links for more details, which is great.
yeah,
Actually, 4 if you get the base capacity configuration. Great.
correct.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about QuickSight. All right. We'll
That one I'm
be
excited about.
we'll be right back.
Public cloud costs
Perfect.
going up and your AWS bill growing without the right cost controls? CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by focusing on AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe with zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. The best part? With your approval, CloudFix finds and implements AWS fixes to help you run more efficiently. Visit cloudfix.com for a free savings assessment.
All right. QuickSight announces the Developer SDK 2.0. We're big fans of QuickSight.
Yep.
So, as a summary, QuickSight is AWS's dashboarding tool, and it's competitive with Tableau or Power BI, but obviously the advantage is that it's AWS native, so you're not worrying to audit another vendor. It lives right near your data, and obviously in the same region or the same availability zone even. So that's great. You
Correct.
could use QuickSight, and now QuickSight announces SDK, QuickSight embedding SDK.
Correct. So the nice thing about QuickSight, which I really, really love, is that almost every real application requires some sort of a BI dashboard, right? You're always slicing and dicing data. You have these reports. You have all of these standard parts of typical enterprise applications. And instead of building one from scratch on your own and writing, tens of thousands of lines of code to kind of make that happen, you can literally embed a QuickSight dashboard into your application and have your users use it the way they would typically use any application. So you don't have to build any of these from scratch. You don't have to go figure out what widget to embed and what JavaScript that goes around it, or what libraries to bring in. You literally just design your dashboard in QuickSight and embed it as is into an application. And now with this new SDK, it just makes it easier to do it the right way. There's tons of errors. There's the life cycle around the iframe. Your application can actually use this to react to what's happening inside that iframe, instead of it being just some dumb, embedding that used to happen in the past. And you have a lot more control, just like any other application, about what happens to that iframe. So I think that's really amazing. It just makes it simpler to embed these dashboards into your application. And the one thing that I actually wanted to do was go to, instead of the blog post, there was this page, the GitHub.
Okay.
That's the GitHub page. There was another link that actually talked about how that SDK worked. Where did I see that? Read the blog post. So go to the blog post.
Yeah, let's see.
There's a blog post, the third word in the last line. That's a link. Third word in the last line where it says blog post.
Yep, thank you.
This is the detailed blog post you want to go through. And I think Raj, Mayank, and Rohit have actually done a brilliant job of laying out. This is when we talk about the blog post, being developer friendly. This is what I am usually looking for. A step-by-step guide that lays out all the specific details. It allows you within minutes to do something. Exactly. Here's a self-contained example you can get started with. This is a perfect example of enabling developers to get started with, a new service, a new announcement, trying it out very quickly. So brilliant job with this one. I think I'd like this to be the template or the bar. So I'm going to give this a good 5.
Oh, wow.
Very rarely do I give it a 5, but they just made it so simple, completely simple.
All right, there we go.
We have a 5? We do.
We do have a 5. So congratulations to the authors of this blog post and to the QuickSight team. And I really like what you said. Sometimes coming from the data science world, right, you think you're typically not very experienced with the front end development. And you say, okay, I just want to have a chart on a web page that updates itself. And you think, how hard could that be? And then you get, a day later, you're still reading, okay, what Python package should I use? Should I use IPy widgets? Should I use Voila?
Right.
Should I use Seaborn? Should I use Plotly? Oh, do I need to pay for Plotly? Or maybe I should do this in React. Is there a way to do it? And then before you know it, you are so far down a rabbit hole of a rabbit hole. And you're like, I just wanted a graph on my page.
Correct.
And so QuickSight dashboarding is one of those things where the end goal isn't that complicated, but there's 1,000 things to get right along the way. And so leveraging AWS's work on here. And QuickSight, maybe it's not as customizable as some of the other ones, but I think that the trade-off of just being able to get it done and have it shipped, have it represent the data.
That said, there's tons of customization you still can do with QuickSight. I mean, the SDK actually gives you a lot of very detailed customizations you can do. You can do CSS. You can, change a bunch of stuff around the widgets. It's pretty neat. You can change the layouts of the dashboards dynamically in code. So there's a lot that you can do with QuickSight, which, yes, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago was not possible. But literally in the last 6 to 8 months, the number of changes that have happened in QuickSight are pretty amazing. And I couldn't be more excited. I think now, finally, applications can embed these QuickSight dashboards without worrying at all about ever creating a dashboard, exercise of their own. This just eliminates hundreds of thousands of lines of code that typically got written to create dashboards in applications.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's tons of money saved. So I encourage you to go ahead, take a look at your applications and delete code. Like, the thing, by the way, that I enjoy the most when it comes to actually looking at code, reading code, writing code, is deleting code. So this would be one of my favorite exercises. Delete tons of code.
This is definitely it simplifies.
100%.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And thinking about, when you try to, as a non front-end developer, right? The front end's notorious for changing the library of the day every couple of weeks. And say if you wrote something in one framework, it might not be maintained in a year from now. Whereas, with
Yeah,
QuickSight, you've got the
exactly.
backing of Amazon. Amazon doesn't deprecate things very well. Actually, in one of the conversations that we were having with Corey Quinn and Jeff and John, we were talking about, can you name the 7 AWS services that have been deprecated? And they're all very esoteric ones that have been not deprecated, but really superseded. So QuickSight's
Yeah,
always going to be there.
correct.
And so you can build on QuickSight
Okay.
instead of some random plotting library you find on a Medium post.
Very, very true.
Right. Well,
Okay.
this has been a nice, short but sweet show. I've got to jump back into the partner conference. I think, Rahul, you had quite the day of recording as well, so looking forward to seeing the
That
content
is
that comes
true.
out of it.
Correct.
All right.
And we are recording for our next series of podcasts, the AWS Insiders. A lot of very exciting stuff coming up next season. So stay tuned. We will talk more about that very soon.
And then next week we have Andrew Boyer of AWS. We're going to be talking about GP3. So that's going to be exciting.
Great. So
All
if you
right.
have any questions, please reach out to us, let us know, or just join the live stream and post your questions live.
I'll put a LinkedIn poll out in advance, see if we can gather some questions in advance for Andrew. So that's a good idea.
That sounds
All
great.
right.
Looking forward to next week. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
See you all
one.
soon.
All right.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your